Hey everybody, it's Moonbo here, and welcome back to some more Scrap Mechanics Survival. Now, today is going to be a different format of video. Every time I do something in survival mode, everyone usually asks me how did I build it, and I can't share things on the workshop, so people can't really dismantle those creations and check them out for themselves. So I'm trying a new format. I'm going to be doing commentary of a time-lapse of me building this brand new survival truck. Now, this is a relatively simple build, but I think I'm really happy with how it's designed and how it turned out, so I'm going to talk through the build and my decision making. So the first thing that I do is I usually try and get a size reference for my creation. So in this case here, I put 2 rows of metal on the back there. Now those are in place of the chairs that I will be putting later on. They are both the 4 wide driver seat and passenger seat. So I got the sizing done up for the width of the vehicle. Now, later on, we're going to see that there was not enough planning in place. Now, what I'm doing at the front of the vehicle, though, is I am setting up the front suspension of the truck. Now, I'm going to just say it outright. I did not do a very good job with my first iteration of suspension. It's been a long time since I've done any suspension building in general. So you'll see pretty soon why what I'm doing right now for this front suspension is actually terrible. But I did open up the wheel well. You can see I did kind of like get some room in there for the wheels. And okay, there it is. You can see. This is me building right now, and I'm like, okay, Moonbo, come on, you're being an idiot right now. This is not looking good. But you know, it's been a long time since I've built any type of meaningful suspension. And some of the most fun that I do have while I'm building in Scrap Mechanic is, you know, making mistakes and working through them and figuring out solutions to those mistakes. So it's definitely a lot of fun. So every now and then, though, I do have to go and craft some different parts. So there I am. I'm getting my driver's seat ready. I had a passenger seat sitting in a chest as well. So I'm pretty much just getting those in place because there not only is there going to be the width of the vehicle being dictated by those chairs, but also a certain amount of the length as well. So obviously, the main driver's seat is longer than a passenger seat, so you definitely want to kind of figure out the scaling there. Now, at this point, though, I am just creating a mirror image of the front of the vehicle at the back of the vehicle, and in this case, I'm mirroring my suspension setup. I'm doing the same kind of thing, and I will say, though, that this suspension is still not good. It's still really bad. You're gonna see just how bad it is soon enough. So of course I don't need steering bearings on those back wheels, but either way, I'm pretty happy right now with the progress. The frame is looking good. It looks like a good base for the truck. You know, I'm getting my steering set up as well, making sure I have clearance for those wheels to turn. And then here you can see that I am now adding the final pieces to what you could consider the frame of the vehicle, because now I've switched from metal to wood. Now, the reason why I use metal at the base and for the frame of the vehicle is, of course, because it adds a lot of weight to the lower portion. So the center of mass is going to be really low in the truck, which is going to help when you're driving around. It's going to mitigate a lot of flipping over. So right now, though, I'm just kind of building out the interior as well as the exterior using wood again for all of the non-frame parts, because of course wood is really light as well. So at this point, I'm kind of like balancing back and forth between functionality as well as cosmetics. I find that it makes it easier when you're building if you're kind of doing both at the same time and building them up together, as opposed to trying to focus on only functionality, and then when you get to the cosmetic, then you start to struggle to fit the cosmetic in. So it's kind of like a battle between the two and trying to get them both somewhere where you're pleased with both of them in whatever version you've created. So right now, though, I'm getting some bearings ready. I wanted the front windshield installed as quick as I could, because I mean, obviously, the front windshield is a very cosmetic item. So I think if you do want certain cosmetic things with your build, you have to kind of prioritize them at a certain point. Otherwise, you're going to maybe end up with some struggles in the cosmetic department. So, of course, there are no wedges, so I am using those curved blocks for a lot of the smoothing out kind of stuff. But now, look at this. You can see now that it is starting to look like a truck. And that's what I was going for. I wanted like a pickup style truck. Now, here you can see I'm installing the gas motor in the front of the truck there. Now, I'm actually going to be crafting another one, and I wanted 2 of them in there because I also wanted 2 fuel tanks, but we'll see that momentarily. So right now, though, I'm flipping back to a little bit of a cosmetic style design here. You can see I'm kind of getting the truck bed going. I'm getting my suspension up. I want to make sure that there's some good ground clearance. And there we go. I got my second engine in. I'm going to upgrade that all the way up to a level 5. Very expensive in component kits. But I got both of those leveled up now, so we got both of the gas engines. The suspension is not done yet. We're going to be doing some testing eventually once I do get the gas engines going with the fuel tanks. So, of course, it's pretty standard to have openings at the top of your vehicle. Those openings at the top of your vehicle are really good when you're driving around and you want to hop out. You know, you're not going to get stuck on the roof. So there we go. I was looking around for a resource collector. I really want a resource collector in my exploration vehicle because, you know, you're killing hay bots all the time, and their resources, their spines or whatever they are always falling to the ground, and normally I would just like hand refine them, but it's really a waste of time. And again, you know, flipping back into some cosmetic, you can see I'm kind of putting some little side steps on the driver's side and passenger side doors there. Now, they're cosmetic, but there's also functionality. You can actually step up on them and get into the seat pretty easily. You know, putting door handles on doors that don't exist. Having some fun with the cosmetics. Making a whole bunch more of those curved pieces because, like I said it already, there are no wedge blocks whatsoever. But I think they do a pretty good job of filling in that gap. Now, there are a few things that I do change. Well, actually, here it is right now. I'm making a major change to that front hood. I decided that the front hood was 1 block too tall. So I removed the windshield, got rid of that hood, and then you can see I basically just get the windshield ready to get put back in place. And now I'm able to lower the entire front hood by 1 block. And that means I just have to put those, the curved blocks right there back in place. And already I'm seeing like some major improvements, I would say, in the design of the vehicle, because a lot of the functionality lies within the suspension, which is clearly already done. But I get the windshield back in place, and now I'm kind of deciding, do I want the windshield to go all the way up to the roof of the car or not? You know, I crafted another fuel tank, and this is good though, because that means once I get all my fuel tank stuff in there, I can eventually connect those fuel tanks to the engine. There we go. And I will be able to start test driving the vehicle, which is honestly a very important part of construction, or like constructing a vehicle, is you want to be able to start test driving it to see for stability. Is it going to flip over? Are your wheels going to completely crumple and fail miserably? And that's what happened in my case. I think really, when you look at my suspension closely, there's just way too many bearings. And I am no expert in suspension. There's all sorts of crazy wishbone suspension you can make, and that is not necessarily my strong point. But I do get a whole bunch more bearings ready to go, because this is where I start to like go even more complicated than before. You can see I'm adding another arm from the inside of the suspension, connecting to that first internal bearing. Now, am I making things better or worse? I mean, okay, honestly, I'm making things worse and better at the same time. You can see that my truck did the splits. It's just, it's better than it was before, but it's just not where it needs to be, and I'm pretty sure it's because I just have way too many bearings. And you can see I'm testing it with my lift, but it's pulling the wheels outwards, so I'm still not satisfied with the suspension right now. I'm taking a close look at it. I want it to work well. Obviously, I don't want an unstable vehicle. So you can see now at this point, I'm removing all the wheels. Now, this is something I think that could be helpful for new players to Scrap Mechanic is, you know, don't be afraid to take stuff off, dismantle it, and fix it up again. Now, here, this was weird. I was trying to weld this together. It wasn't letting me weld it, which was kind of strange, but I was able to reverse the build process and then weld it at the other end, which was all right. And basically, at this point, I'm trying to just really stabilize that suspension. And I don't want the wheels to constantly buckle and flip over and all that stuff. So at this point, I feel like I'm pretty happy with the suspension, but realistically, with a lot of the things that I wanted to do with this truck, the design for the suspension was really not going to let that happen. And we're going to see eventually that the current suspension design is really taking up way too much space, especially in the back, because I wanted to have room for stuff in the back. Now, there are all sorts of decisions that I do go through while I'm building, and you will see more changes down the line as I progress with my truck. And clearly, I'm very hung up on the suspension. I was thinking to myself, oh, I want really cool, fancy-looking suspension, when sometimes that shouldn't be the case. You know, sometimes maybe you're better off to settle for something a little more simplistic, that, you know, is a little more guaranteed to work right off the bat. But eventually, I do get there. So I think I put the wheels back on. I don't think I put my steering bearings back. You know, that's the kind of stuff that every now and then you kind of forget about. So I don't think I put my steering bearings back, which is an oversight. You know, it might slow down the build process a little bit, but hey, you know, when you're trying to think of a whole bunch of different things at once when you're designing a vehicle... Okay, there we go. I put the suspension, or the steering bearings back on again. But when you're trying to think of all sorts of different things and, you know, you want to try and make it work well, you might kind of skip over a step or two. And there's a major thing that I forgot to think about in this build that we're going to see coming up eventually as well. But right now I'm just kind of testing more of the suspension. It seems to be working. It seems to not be buckling anymore, and I think at this point, I'm probably relatively happy with that suspension design. So I decide to go back to a little bit more of the cosmetic stuff, and I find doing like functionality and then cosmetic stuff together at the same time, like I said, it helps do both in good progress. But I do find it also is it's good for not like getting burnt out on one thing, you know, so you can kind of have some fun, make it look cool. Okay, go back and try and make that complicated thing that you wanted, and then go back to designing it to look cool again. And it gives you a little bit of variety in the building that you're doing as well. So I don't know if you noticed, but I just measured the resource collector, and there's a big reason for it. Okay, yeah, I'm still measuring it. And this is kind of where I realized this was a major oversight. I didn't consider the size or the width of the resource collector, which is a huge oversight. So I'm hopping in my helicopter now. So I think at this point, I'm probably thinking like, oh man, there's something really big that I have to do with my truck now. So I need a little bit of a break. I'm going to go for a little bit of a helicopter ride, because there are some interesting pieces, of course, on the tops of warehouses that I wanted to use. So I went to the first warehouse that was closest to my base. You know, I'm looking around, trying to find these ramp pieces and the wedges, you know, because there are mystical wedges out there at the tops of warehouses, and I really wanted to get my hands on some of them. And I'm not talking about the big ones or the huge ramp pieces. I'm talking about the smaller wedges. So there was none on that first warehouse, so I was like, you know what? I'm going to go a little bit further. I know that there's a warehouse just a little further down my map here. I'm going to head over to this one, and I didn't realize that the rooftops were different as well. I thought all of the rooftops were relatively the same, but in this case here, this one does have some of these ramp pieces. So I'm looking around trying to find the small wedges, because I knew that I've seen them. I mean, even in creative mode, you see those wedges sometimes, and I didn't realize, but eventually, as I'm grabbing these really interesting, small, thinner wedge pieces, I finally find them right there at the top. So I was a little disappointed to find out that the top of this warehouse, you know, there's only so many warehouses, but the top of this one, it only had 2 wedge pieces, and that was it. So I probably could have went to more warehouses, but I was like, you know what? No, I want to keep on going with this truck build. So I grabbed the 2 wedge pieces, you know, I take what I can get, and then I'm going to head back to my base now to, I guess, really just try and find something to do with 2 little wedge pieces. There we go. Look at that beautiful landing right on my craft bod. So I got the 2 wedges. So I'm like, what do I want to do with these? You know, I put them in the front wheel well. Looks all right. I put them on the front little section right there, kind of on the top of the wheel well. And I'm kind of happy with that right there. After the time lapse, though, I'm going to show you guys the truck in game and kind of give a final thoughts and conclusion on the build. I put those ramp pieces there, and I was like, oh, that looks pretty cool, but it doesn't really fit the style that I'm going for. I'm going for a little bit more of a pickup truck, and that was starting to look a little bit more like a cyber truck. So now I'm back here again. Remember, this is where I was starting to realize I didn't take into consideration the resource collector. I have no room for anything, and with that suspension design, there's even less room than what I need in general for the resource collectors. So I decide at some point I'm gonna have to tear it all apart and make room for that resource collector. But the major problem, though, is the fact that I don't even have the correct width on my vehicle to put that collector in the back there appropriately. It's gonna not fit right. It's gonna be out of kilter. So there's a big thing that I have to do eventually, which is kind of annoying, but we'll see that in a moment. All right, there you go. You can see I'm trying to get that resource collector to make sense in my mind. It's just not, and I'm kind of stalling. I'm sitting there, I'm staring at my truck. I'm stalling because I know what I have to do, and I honestly don't really want to have to do it. But here we go. Look at that. So I start chopping the entire truck in 2. There we go. I have 2 halves of my truck now. And so I go around the entire inside cutout portion, and I replace 1 block for the block that I cut out, and then I add a secondary block to add from the original one, which means that I'm going from an odd width to an even width. And that's because the resource collectors, I believe they are like 8 tall, and I wanted to lay it down flat. So here I'm making room now. You know, I've added the extra block for the width on the truck. I'm starting to make extra room in the back here for basically that resource collector. And so I really wanted it to like make a lot of sense visually as well. So having that resource collector right there pressed up against the back of the cab of the truck, I thought that was kind of like the best spot for it. But now, of course, I have fuel tanks, and I don't know what to do with them yet. But I'm really happy, actually, with what I decided to do with those fuel tanks, and we'll get to them eventually. But at this point now, I have to rebuild my console inside of the truck, because that's where I had the original controller, and I ended up getting rid of it, of course, because it was on that center line. So I'm reconnecting everything, you know, because some of the stuff got broken in the great cutting in half of the truck. So I'm just doing some final testing again on the simple stuff that I've already done, just to make sure I'm on the right track still, and that cutting it in half didn't make any major changes, or increasing the width also didn't cause too many issues as well. But overall, right now, the truck is looking good. It's starting to drive well, but there's still more work to be done. So at this point, I'm pretty happy with what I've got. You know, I take a little quick blueberry and milk break, because that is the only thing anyone should ever eat or drink in the Scrap Mechanic. But at this point, I'm happy, because I go through certain phases with my builds where I'm building and I'm like, oh man, I'm on the right track right now. This is looking good. And then I start doubting myself. I start doubting the design and how it looks. And I start kind of questioning if I'm going in the right direction or not. So at this point, I have those fuel tanks, and I want to get the fuel tanks back in. And I don't know how I'm going to do that. They're quite large. I want 2 of them, though. I want 2 gas engines, and I want 2 fuel tanks, so that I can have even more fuel on the go. So what I ended up doing, though, I ended up breaking all the way in to the truck and putting them into the like front console of the cab, which is really interesting, actually, because it even gives you access to the fuel tanks from the driver's seat if you hop out of the driver's seat. Which was really interesting. It was a bit of a design that I wasn't sure about, and I improve on it in a little bit as well, actually. You saw there, I added the front grille. You know, you gotta have a front grille on your truck. If you don't, then what are you doing? Adding cosmetics, yes, but also some functionality, because they will help defend the vehicle from attacks from haybots and stuff like that. Because, of course, there is an extra layer for them to attack before they get to the main blocks. I added the little, the truck bed door there as well, the gate. Now, obviously, you know, you gotta craft a lot of those curved pieces, to do the cosmetics. But they're only, a little bit of metal, you know, it's not expensive to make them, and they're pretty quick to craft as well. So right here, I switched the bearings from the front side of the truck to the back side of the truck. And the reason for that is because right now I'm doing testing. Like, in my mind, I was thinking, oh, maybe I want my resource collector to be really, really close to the ground. So by removing that part of the truck bed, look, you can see I'm able to make some height adjustments to the resource collector. I can bring it really low to the ground to make sure that it actually collects those resources. I think in the end, though, I decided not to have it going through and having a hole in the truck. But I mean, we'll see that in a moment. Right now, I'm just adding some functionality. You know, I got the gate for the truck bed there. I'm testing it out. You know, it goes up and down. It's not 100% useful, but it does help when it comes to accessing the back of the truck, because I do add chests as well. So here, I decide to add the metal back in, and now the resource collector has found its permanent home. So that's where the resource collector is going to stay. I'm really happy with it there. And I didn't have to put it down all the way to the ground because it's able to grab the resources no problem. And we're going to see that once I'm into the actual game. So now I have headlights, though, too. The headlights are working. They look really, really good. You know, you got to have your headlights, at least something to see at night, because it's very, very dark in survival at nighttime. So there we go. Now I'm crafting 2 large chests. This is a massive improvement from my original survival vehicle. If you haven't seen that, I will leave a link to that video just so you can get an idea of what my original survival vehicle was for exploration, and maybe understand why this is such a huge improvement. But I got the 2 large chests in the back there with the resource collector as well, 2 fuel tanks, or 2 gas tanks, and 2 gas engines, which I think is, it's not excessive, you know? I don't think it's an excessive thing to do, because it's gonna allow for longer driving, and more fuel, not necessarily efficiency, but just, you know, being able to have 2 fuel tanks just means you can kind of drive for twice as long, basically. So again, you know, kind of getting back into some of the cosmetics, those curved metal pieces. I'm telling you right now, if you do want to make stuff that looks relatively good in survival, then you are definitely going to need to craft a bunch of those for your vehicles. I use them on my large transport truck. I use them on my helicopter as well. They are just absolutely amazing. So I was able to put that light in the middle there. We'll see it better in the game itself, but that center console light turned out really well, and it would have never worked if the truck was odd width. So there's so many things that by adding that extra block width to the truck just made it so much better. Now you can see I'm doing some testing right now on the suspension, so I'm going for longer drives so I can gather more speed and do a sharp turn. So that's kind of like a really good test for you guys when you're playing in survival mode, or any mode for that matter. So that's pretty much the major part of the building. I'm gonna hop into my survival world. We're gonna look at the truck itself. It's all painted. It looks absolutely fantastic. I'm gonna show you the finished product, how it all works together, and maybe some things that I learned along the way. Alright, so here is the finished truck. Really happy with the design. There are a few things that I changed since the finish of the time lapse. Of course, obviously, it's all painted. Looks absolutely awesome. One thing I finally decided was I put that wedge piece up there. You can actually see, maybe if I hop into the seat, up here at this light, you can see that is where I put the wedge piece. And I feel like when you look at the profile of the truck and look at it from the sides and all that, I think that is probably the best spot for them. I would love to have a whole bunch of them and actually put them into the wheel wells, but for the time being, I did add some of those curved pieces into the wells. Looks a little bit better that way. Now, as for the container, you can see I did decide to have the blocks underneath it there. And that is not an issue whatsoever. If we go out into the hayfield here, we can find ourselves a bot and try and collect that resource. All right, here we go. We got one. Oh, we're going to take him out. So this is what's great about this truck and having a resource collector on your vehicle. I've never had a resource collector on my vehicle. I don't know why. Oh, hold on. Oh, whoops. I just blocked that walk-in. Okay, hold on. We got to save this guy now. There we go. Okay, so now we've got 2 spines to pick up. So before, though, like I was saying, I didn't have a resource collector, which was just the stupidest thing ever. So if you guys have an exploration vehicle, I highly suggest you make the plan to have the collector there. Okay, these walks, these poor things are getting attacked left, right, and center here. Now, another design thing that I decided to do was these fuel tanks. I put them at the front here on the hood. They look absolutely awesome. Seeing the fuel gauge on the top here as well is great information. You know, when you're driving around, you have a very, very quick and easy way to check your fuel to make sure you're not about to run out. And I decided to lift them up. You can see I lifted them up by 1 block, and that was just enough to make it so that you can see like a little bit of change in the side profile design, because, you know, when I make stuff in Scrap Mechanic, even if it's survival, I want it to look good as well as function properly. Now, as for the suspension, I can pop this up on a lift really quickly here. Now, there's nothing too special about the suspension, but just to see, like, the final design, anyway, was I removed the suspension all the way, or sorry, not the suspension, I removed the bearing at the top there, and just had the suspension hard mounted to the hood of the vehicle. But you can see, despite that, there is still quite a bit of room here for the suspension to bounce. And I did end up using the sport suspension. There is also the long off-road suspension as well. That probably would have worked just as fine. But for some reason, I don't know why exactly, but I did decide to go with the sport. So yeah, that is my new survival truck. It is loads of fun to drive. It's so much better than my original vehicle. More storage, the ability to gather resources as well on the go, double fuel tank, double engine, fuel tanks with very, very obvious information being displayed. We got the center console. Everything is really protected on the inside. The one thing I might add eventually is maybe I might add some type of protection around the wheels, or maybe I could even craft an extra wheel or 2 and maybe put some spare tires or something instead. So either way, it's just kind of something that, you know, in case you run out of wheels, or not run out of wheels, but if your wheel gets destroyed on the go, you might have a bad time getting back to your base. But either way, I hope you guys did enjoy this format of survival video. You guys got to see my build. If you did think it was too fast, don't forget YouTube has the playback control where you can slow down the video and maybe get a little bit more insight into the build process beyond my commentary. But thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. If you guys did enjoy this video, then let me know by hitting that like button. And if you guys want to tune in for some more Scrap Mechanic survival, then be sure to subscribe to the channel. Maybe even turn on your notifications so you can get the latest and the craziest coming from me in Scrap Mechanic. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I will be seeing you in the next one. So bye for now.